Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session, and today we're going to be talking all about construction contracts and what are the things that you need to go and put into those, but more specifically when you're actually engaging with your construction lawyer, how do you give him the best information humanly possible in order to make sure that he gets that contract right? Because there's so many different ways of doing a contract, so many different industry bodies, different contract types, different ways of payment mechanisms, and a whole bunch more. So if you want your contract drawn up correctly, then we've got the right man for you. We've got Pat Ireland from Spiers Ryan, a specialist in construction law, who's going to be talking all about that today. Mate, welcome aboard.
Thanks very much, Rob. Good to see you.
Thank you. Mate, you've just given us at one of our meetups in Sydney a cracking presentation on some of the gotchas in contract law. What we're going to try and cover today is how to avoid those gotchas by actually engaging in the first place up front and giving you all the information humanly possible so you can get that right.
Yep, for sure. No, it was really good during the presentation. Saw a lot of good engagement, a lot of sharp questions. So everyone's thinking on the right track.
Yeah, thank you, mate. For those who've never been to our meetups, we run those Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. Pat presented at the one in Sydney. So if you want to go to those, here are the links in order to do that. We not only turn up physically to those, but we live stream them all the way around the country, folks. So feel free to do that. We also record them so you can go and look at the back catalogue and have a look at that cracking presentation that I'm sure we're going to reference multiple times in this preso today, mate. So firstly, why don't you just tell the world, who is Pat? Why should we be listening to you today, mate?
Sure thing. Well, I'm a construction lawyer by trade. That's all things construction are my bread and butter. So from project inception through to the contracts, through to project delivery, working through claims and that kind of thing. And then also when things go a bit sour, we come in and aim to help clean things up.
Well, we're trying to avoid that today, mate. What we're trying to do is get that engagement right so it doesn't happen.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Mate, give me the 2-second tour as to why it's so important, I guess, to engage, I guess, up front. What are the gotchas in not giving a good brief?
Well, I think in construction, as with many things, change is the only constant. The contracts are, and the idea is to be ready for change and be on the right side of change. And if we haven't fully thought through the project, it's really hard to see those changes and those risks coming.
So is it the kind of thing where a developer goes out to tender, a builder gives them a contract and they just flick it over the fence and go, check that out?
Most often, yeah, most often. I mean, I guess there's definitely merit in sending contracts out with tenders, or at least outlining what your standard commercial position would be. But more often than not, I see, the builder will submit their tender and they'll say, oh, we usually use the MBA BC4, or we use the HIA, or they've all got their favourites, and they can be persuaded, to something a little different, but it's important to have those conversations as early as possible, I think.
And generally, it's the builder, I guess, on the front foot dictating terms up front. And so our role is to try to catch all of the issues and challenges. But the brief is really, I guess, the ability to understand what is it that we're actually trying to achieve. And by knowing what we're trying to achieve, then we're reading the contract in that specific light. So we know, I guess, the outcomes of what we're trying to get out of it. Now, you touched on, I guess, a couple of different things, but I might dive into it a little bit deeper. There's a lot of different contract types out there. So there's a couple of industry association ones. There's the Master Builders and the HIA. There's also the ABIC one, which is led by the Australian Institute of Architects, and then there's the Australian standard ones. So, and then within those, there's subclauses within each of subcontracts within each of those. So maybe we can just give a little bit of a broad overview of, I guess, the differences between them and the pros and cons of each one. Because once the builder's thrown it over the fence, we kind of need to understand the perspective the builder's actually coming from. So let's start with Master Builders, for example. So Give me some insights into the master builder contracts, and what's the pros and cons of using one?
So I would say it's kind of a pro and a con, but it's a very simple contract, which means it is relatively easy to understand for the average person. The issue with that is that it doesn't deal with specific or project specific risks, events that may occur. It is a very standard contract, and as we'd all know, that there's not a lot that's standard about every single deal. It's a matter of finding the contract that fits your job. And while the MBA BC4 or the Cost Plus, or if you're in the commercial, the BC3, they'll address most things. However, when things change and when the project starts, if we're sort of going off in a different direction, it can be difficult to pull things back into line because the contract isn't specific as to how certain events and processes are dealt with. I think it's designed for builders so that they can sign it and put it in the bottom drawer, and they don't have to do a lot of contract administration as far as their claims and that kind of thing. Now, that kind of contract definitely has its place, but it's important to think about whether that place is your project, I think.
Putting it, I guess, in lay terms, being an industry contract, and the industry is representing the builder, the contract is, I guess, looking after the builder's interests over and above the developer's interests, or over and above, I guess, the consumer who might be engaging in that contract. So there's a lot of things that are, I guess, weighted towards the builder.
Yes, for sure. I mean, it's designed to make life easy for the builder. It does also have some fairly interesting, and interesting is probably a nice word for it, but interesting risk allocations as far as what sort of delays the builder's on the hook for, and then what sort of delays the developer's on the hook for. A lot of which really should sit with the builder, just in terms of, I guess, logical risk allocation and who can see things coming and who can actually manage them. What we want is a scenario where risks are allocated to the party who can best manage them.
Yeah, and within the suite of contracts for the master builders, my understanding is that there are fundamentally three different versions. So there's the BC3, which is the commercial. You touched on that a second ago. The BC4, which is, I guess, the residential side of things. And then there's the cost plus contracts. Are there any others to be aware of, or?
For smaller projects, yes. I mean, to be honest, I probably wouldn't. If you're in the development game, I probably wouldn't recommend too many of the others. There is a cost plus residential, and then a cost plus for commercial as well. There are a few kind of trade contracts and minor works contracts. I wouldn't think that too many people would really be looking at that. They're more designed for a homeowner having a deck thrown on the back of their house, that kind of thing.
Okay. So fundamentally, the majority of our guys are going to be coming across the BC4, I should say, in most instances, unless they're going for a cost plus. Is there a code word for the cost plus residential?
Probably watch out.
No, so I'm talking about BC4. Is there a BC?
Oh, right. No, they just call it the cost plus residential and the cost plus commercial.
Okay.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah.
Rightio. So that's master builders. Let's talk about HIA. Again, another industry body. I guess master builders and HIA are different competitors, for want of a better word, as an industry association. So a builder will tend to be aligned with one or the other. And I've rarely seen builders that are actually members of both associations, but I'm assuming it's not impossible. Mate, so again, is that another one-sided contract in favour of the builder? Same sort of concepts and catch-alls?
Similarly to the MBA contracts, they're simple contracts, but yes, they do have a lot of things in there which could be more evenly weighted, for sure.
And what are the styles of contracts that you can get for HIA?
So there's a fixed price residential. There is also a cost plus edition. And then there are similarly some smaller, minor works and trade contracts and things like that. It's again, yeah, it's a simple contract. It delves into a few more of the risks. However, it is a builder friendly contract at its heart. Yeah.
So for both the master builders and the HIA, what size project are they best suited for?
So, in all honesty, I probably wouldn't recommend using either of those contracts anywhere above, say, $2.5 $3 million, or if your project is complex. So, if we're beyond, say, a single dwelling or a duplex, if the site is a difficult one, if you're likely to have to deal with authorities in terms of access and any utilities, that kind of thing. So it's a size of project assessment, but then also a project specific, what are the risks? But I'd say around the sort of 2 to 3 million mark, I'd probably be looking at least having some fairly substantial amendments to those contracts. There are other alternatives though as well.
Yeah, and I guess some of those amendments that you're referencing, the detail of that is in that presentation that you did the other day, so we can loop everybody back to going and watching that rather than diving deeper into it here. We might pick up a couple of those themes though as we go through this presentation.
Sure.
But fundamentally, smaller projects, I'd say 3-pack, 4-pack max. And at that point, we're probably breaking, I guess, the intent of the contract.
Yeah, I mean, it's as far as the project value risk goes, it's everything that unfolds when changes occur that we're not expecting. It's typically a percentage of the contract price. So if we're not going to be containing risks really well, we don't. Once we're getting into those bigger projects, we don't want the ramifications to be talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, where otherwise on a small project it might be tens.
Yeah. So we've done our first project, our second project. We're starting to grow up, and we're starting to put our big boy pants on now, and getting into bigger projects. Now we're going to start to step into more, I guess, broader contracts. So the Australian Building Industry contract, so ABIC as it's actually known. My understanding is that's the Australian Institute of Architects, actually in partners with master builders. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. So they've joined up and to produce a contract, and I will say it's not to say it's a better contract, but it does deal with specific scenarios in a lot more detail. It has mechanisms in it which reflect larger projects. One of the key things, though, is that it is heavily reliant on you having a good architect in there who is essentially superintending the job. So giving directions on the developer's behalf, assessing claims, essentially keeping the job running as far as the commercial and project management side of things goes.
So worthy of just touching on that term, the superintendent. So what is a definition of a superintendent, and can anyone be a superintendent? You mentioned there the architect, but could anyone actually be a superintendent?
So a superintendent is it's a third party that's essentially managing all those contract management, so all the contract administration, claims, directions, that kind of thing. And then in a lot of circumstances, they're also handling more of the project management side of things. As far as who's best suited, in my eyes, it depends on the project. Certain projects will lend themselves more to a superintendent with an engineering background. If there's going to be detailed design development during the project, you would really want someone with some engineering background. If we're talking the design's all sorted, builders on site, but there may be cosmetic design development, that kind of thing, you'd be looking more towards an architect. Key to the role, though, is that project management experience, keeping things on track, organisation, seeing issues before they really become issues, and communication. Communication is the biggest one. If your superintendent won't communicate clearly, it's really going to roll downhill quickly.
Yeah. The key point being, it's someone independent of both the builder and the developer that is, I guess, there to, keep the project, running smoothly, identify any issues, and massage them through, for want of a better word, but gives that superintendent the power to actually have a stick of sorts to keep it on track.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, there are general obligations for the party. It also depends how that superintendent has come into play, but typically there will be obligations on them as far as good faith. So keeping both parties' interests in mind. However, that the role is tweaked fairly regularly to become more of a principals representative or a developers representative, so representative of the upstream party. It's important to think about how you want that to play out and how you want the relationship to work. Builders will sometimes work more collaboratively with a superintendent that at least as far as the builder is concerned, appears more impartial. However, it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for that person that's in your corner, you're probably looking at more at a scenario where they are the principal's representative rather than the traditional superintendent role.
And is there a? I'm going to ask this in a how do I catch myself in or punch myself in the mouth type approach? Can the developer be their own superintendent?
So, as far as the actual actions of superintending the job and project managing the job, there are some issues as far as project managing and having the right licenses and that kind of thing. Particularly in Queensland, I'd really recommend you get across all the QBCC rules, but also their approach to those issues. They move swiftly, and then also ensuring, whichever state you're developing in, that you're across the regulators' processes, their rules, that legislation. As far as typically the way that the superintendent, at least in standard form contracts, would operate, typically it is a third party. It kind of removes the reason for having a superintendent if you're going to be performing those roles, claims assessment, giving directions, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I guess the last one from a standard forms contract perspective, the Australian standards contract. So you've got the AS 4000 and the AS 4902. So tell us a little bit about the Australian standard contracts.
Yeah, so the 4000 being a construct only contract, and then the 4902 being a design and construct. There are a number of other ones in the suite. However, they're the most common in sort of the independent developer side of the market. These contracts are great because they allow a lot of room for fairly. It makes it fairly easy to amend them to be project specific. In their standard form, they are very general, very bare bones. I've really only had a couple come across my desk through the years where the project actually proceeded on the basis of an unamended AS contract. We most often see them heavily amended. They lend themselves more to amendment than, say, the HIA or the NBA.
Yeah, and probably the key takeaway for anyone using the Australian standard contract, that point you just made, the template is standard. What you get handed is usually far from that. And so where I've seen gotchas happen in the past is the builder will I guess modify the contract to suit themselves, and then hand that over as if that is the standard, without any track changes. So you can't actually see what has actually been modified. You have to read it from start to finish in order to catch all of those elements. So my guidance, for want of a better word, is if you're going to be using any version of contract, you want to be asking for any amendments to be marked up or specifically, called out where the changes actually are from the original.
Definitely, and I mean it sounds simple, but reading, like going and doing a line by line, highlighting the, as far as instructions that I receive from clients, if they've read through the contract and highlighted things that to them seem risky or not, not aligned with their project goals, that makes things a lot easier, as opposed to, hey Pat, can you read this and let me know what's wrong with it?
Yeah. So now for those, standard form contracts, whether it be the ABIC or the Australian standard ones, I'm assuming if we're talking 4 packs and below, 3 million and below for the industry associations, I'm assuming these ones are really designed for everything above, or is there a superpower contract?
Oh, I mean, we use Australian standard project contracts on projects in the hundreds of millions, so that they are very customizable. I will say the Australian standard more so than the ABIC. The ABIC probably is more appropriate in a slightly higher range than the MBA, BC4, or Cost Plus, and the HIA. I probably wouldn't be using an ABIC if we're talking sort of north of 5 million, that kind of thing, or a particularly complex project. Yeah.
Okay. So now we've got a series of graduation of contracts that we're actually going to go through depending upon the size. And as part of that, when we're going out to tender for our builders, understanding those elements and challenges, we should be guiding the builder to say, look, we want you to use one of these style contracts based on the size of your project.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about that communication piece. Up front is the best time to work through commercial risks, because the longer you leave it, the more adversarial and the more at odds people tend to get.
Yeah.
I think it's always worthwhile having some of those key commercial aspects in your request for tender, as far as how you plan to deal with delays, how you plan to deal with changes to the work, having it out in the open, where your design's up to, any options that you may want to exercise throughout the job. And I think it's important to raise those things because it also puts, at the forefront, these are the issues we're going to have to make sure are reflected in the contract. And it also gets you thinking, well, what's this contract actually saying in relation to what I want to achieve with this project?
Yeah, and on top of that, every single version of those different contracts, and we touched on 4 different flavors, and within those there are subsets. They're all going to have different gotchas within each document type, and so understanding what we're starting with will greatly or dramatically change the kind of special conditions and amendments that actually need to go into the contract.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, a contract without context is very likely to, or rather very unlikely to hit the mark.
Yeah. So right now we've got the contract type, but I guess the next layer to this is our procurement model. So are we wanting to do purely construction only, i.e. we've got all the designs and all the engineering and that sort of thing, and we just want the builder to do everything it says on paper? Or do we want what is called a design and construct, where the builder takes on a lot of those design elements? Mate, what are the primary differences between those two from an engagement model and also from a risk perspective?
Yeah, so it's an important one to think of up front because it really gives you the direction as to how things are going to unfold. In terms of construct only, it's the simpler format or the one with which builders are typically more familiar. Builders who are keen to manage design, that's more of a niche than your average, even for luxury builders, that kind of thing. Managing design and that skill set is a rarity. It's definitely not out of this world sort of thing, but it's you've really got to consider it up front. Now, in terms of construct only, the developer will be going to a designer, and they'll also separately be going to a builder. Now, if we're thinking really hard about how we contract with the builder, we should also be thinking really hard about how we contract with the designer. In terms of what does that deal entail? What are you expecting them to produce for the money that you're paying them? And then also, how is their work going to influence this project, the builder's construction of the job? Design issues are probably one of the most common causes of variations and delays. So construct only, above all else, I would be saying having a thoroughly thought through design that's completed to an IFC or AFC, issued for construction, approved for construction standard, really important. In terms of design and construct, ensuring that you're getting your requirements across to the builder and their designer is probably the key thing. Up front, what are you hoping to achieve? If you're not going to be sitting down with the architect or a designer and working through every little element and working through renders and saying, no, I'd rather this look that way, that kind of thing, having a well thought out but not necessarily fully detailed preliminary design can really help that process. It's in terms of, I guess, pros and cons, design and construct, having a one-stop shop as far as for the developers, from the developer's point of view, any issues as far as whether they relate to design, quality of construction, or the quality of the design, you're just going to the builder, and that's they are wearing the risk of those designs. I was just going to say, in terms of the kind of immediate disadvantages, most of the standard form contracts don't inherently deal with design and construct. That you would be looking more towards an AS 4902 or similar to actually capture what you're wanting the design to achieve, and then also what happens if that design is not perfect.
Yeah, and there's probably, the term design is very simplistic, but there's a number of different layers to what you actually want to be considering in that. So firstly, there's the aesthetic that you're actually trying to get. There's the functionality, and I guess it's being fit for purpose. So understanding your demographics of who's going to be using that product and the usability and functionality of that. Then there's the engineering level. So, what kind of, I guess, engineering technologies that we're actually going to be going into, I guess, layouts of things like electrical and pipe work and air conditioning, ducting and all those sorts of things. And then there's the actual quality itself. So what is the, I guess, the usability of that in the end? Do you want it to be robust or you just want it to look pretty? So there's a lot that actually goes into the design, so that when people say design, most people are just thinking about just that aesthetic element, but they need to think all the way through to the end.
Definitely. And in terms of compliance with specific planning permission and legislative requirements, that's why you really want to be looking for, if you're planning on going design and construct, you're really looking for a builder with experience in that area, but also with a long-standing relationship with a reputable designer who works in the area, so they're familiar with all of the local rules and laws and all that kind of thing, as far as planning goes. And also that they're familiar with your type of project. If we're looking at things like over 55s, or if we're looking at those more niche projects, they come with their own set of challenges and rules and things you need to achieve. So it's really important to be diligent in your selection of the builder and also their design partner, and in a construct only scenario, your design partner, and really working through those issues up front.
Yeah, there's one other layer that I forgot, which is the National Construction Code, and actually making it, I guess, legally able to be constructed. Because having something that looks the part, it is not necessarily legally compliant.
No, for sure. I mean, it comes back to you want to be working with people who are well informed and they're experienced in the area, particularly if the if you're going with a design and construct, you to a degree you are figuring things out on the run, as opposed to a construct only scenario is a little more segmented. You go into your architect, you're working through all the design issues, you're reaching your completion stage for the design, and then you're handing over for construction. In the design and construct model, you'd often be looking for the builder to be heavily involved up front. It's not a matter of you engage with the builder and then they pass your brief to the designer and the builder has no involvement. That's not likely to go well. You really want the builder working in with the designer, collaborating, coming up with particularly any value engineering solutions that you can find, I think.
Yeah, where I see it used more commonly, and you may see different to this, is an architect or draftsman is actually used to get it through to the development approval stage, which is functionally just lines on a page. And then it's handed over to the builder for a design and construct to take it to the engineering level detail and actually, I guess, finish the product and get that to the building approval process. Is that kind of what you see typically, or?
Yes, yeah. I mean, in the residential and small commercial development end of the market, that's typically how it unfolds. It becomes really important that DA design is typically it's the bare minimum you can do in order to get your approvals. That's the idea, so that you can get cracking. You're not hung up in council or waiting on that stamped approval. So it's important that you're then clearly defining at what point the builder is accepting all this design risk, to what degree are they accepting the preliminary designs or the DA designs, and how the mechanism works. If they identify something that should change in the DA designs, how that mechanism is going to work, as far as should they have seen that up front before pricing the job, or are they entitled to approach it more generally and claim more money later? And I mention these things because those scenarios, as in everything in a design and construct, everything that happens before we've got excavators on site doing demo or a site cut, everything that happens before then is really not dealt with well in a lot of the smaller or the standard form contracts for the smaller end of the market. It's just not contemplated, which is a real issue as far as time, but then also those dreaded variations that pop up if we're talking coordination of different trade packages and designs, site condition issues, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So hence, looking at those standard form contracts, and in particularly the AS series, I guess as you go up the food chain, more likely. So, okay, we've got the contracts, we've got our procurement model now. Now there's then the pricing model. So fixed price, cost plus, provisional sums, and guaranteed maximum prices are the ones that really come to mind. I think there's one more, might be cost plus with a ceiling.
So that's essentially that guaranteed maximum price. So that one's intended to be a bit of a middle ground between fixed price and cost plus. But those four mechanisms for payment are the most common that we see in this part of the market. And obviously, they all come with their advantages and disadvantages. But it all comes back to understanding what is going to trigger your liability to pay an amount. Really understanding that mechanism is the most important thing.
Yeah. So So we've got 4 different contract types. We've got 2 different procurement models. We've got 4 different pricing models. So the permutations on that, just trying to do the math in my head, pretty insane. So all of that context is basically why we're having this conversation now about why it's so important to actually have that engagement early with yourself and give ourselves a really good brief.
Definitely. And I mean, it's always, no two projects are identical typically. So it's why would you want to use a contract that's identical that's used for projects that are far different to yours? Stepping away from that standard approach really achieves better outcomes from a commercial and contractual perspective.
So what are some of the key points, I guess, that we want to actually put into a brief? So is it just a matter of rocking up and going, here's my contract, or do you have a list of 50 questions that you're going to ask us, or how does that engagement model work?
So it kind of all boils down to if you ask a standard question, you're going to get a standard response. Our projects are not nothing but standard. We want to be building things that are going to attract buyers, and that doesn't lend itself to the standard approach. If I receive a contract from a developer, yes, I do have a list of questions, and to be honest, most of them are not. It's not what do you think of this clause and that kind of thing, because appreciate that's my job. It's really working through the project itself, how you want things to unfold, and how you're going to manage these things. So I tend to ask a lot of questions. I'm very interested in the job itself, and the goals as well. We're all chasing kind of the holy trinity of good, fast, and cheap, but there's that old saying you can only pick 2. So we want to make sure we're approaching the contract from a specific point of view to achieve the right balance for those.
Yeah, agreed. So I guess in doing that, understanding your goals. So what are you trying to achieve from a I guess the form and function of the product itself, and I'm assuming understanding the quality that you're looking for, that sort of stuff. What are the things that we want to consider from a goals perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, one of the first ones is timing. How important is the program? Sometimes I've seen developers who they've done their market research, they've got their forecasting there as far as how the market's going to be tracking, and they may have a sweet spot that they're looking to target, which is it may not be immediately after the project the construction is finished. In which case you might not be as concerned around program and making sure things are done quickly. Conversely, you may be looking to strike while the iron's hot. The market's hot. You want to have a product that's ready to go. You'd really be looking to tighten all of those risk allocations around what events entitle the builder to additional time. As far as quality goes, we're looking when we're in the kind of the home building sector. There are a number of implied warranties as to quality. Now, they apply in a general sense. The key thing from a specific sense is a clearly scoped and specified set of contract documents. So, and ensuring that you're not making assumptions about quality, as far as the standards for work and what kind of marks the work must hit. If it's not in writing, it essentially doesn't exist.
Yeah, I agreed. So, and you touched on time. I guess a lot of builders were doing projects very, very fast prior to COVID. Then a lot of things slowed down during COVID for very understandable reasons with logistical supply chains and the like. I've not seen most builders, I guess, tighten back up again. They're still on those longer timelines. I think they got away with it for a while, and now they're going, well, we can keep getting away with it. And what was a 6-month build before is now a 12-month build, which means I got an extra 6 months before things like liquidated damages and that sort of thing start to kick in. So,
yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the program, it's not something to shy away from. I think it's really worthwhile having a discussion with the builder around, well, show me your program. Let's work through it. Let's see how we can achieve the result. The builder typically, they want to complete a successful project as quickly as possible. It's less overheads, that kind of thing for them. However, given COVID and all the supply chain issues, I mean, it's fair enough in my eyes that the builders are still wary of that risk. But in terms of finding a program that really works, it's not over ambitious, but it's also it's as sharp as possible. It's worthwhile having that discussion right up front, particularly if we're looking at, and this is a scenario that I've had come across my desk a couple of times in the last week, is if we're looking at multi-dwelling and we're going to be marketing, we want to be marketing one of them, say we've got 4-pack, 6-pack townhouses, that kind of thing. If we want, say, the one at the front ready for the public to view, so that we can drive that interest. Working through creative solutions as far as the staging of that completion, those kind of things they're the conversations you want to be having up front, not halfway through and trying to get the builder to reallocate resources to focus on one part of the project so that your end goal runs more smoothly. It's working through those potentials for collaborative solutions, I think, as far as the program goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess a little tip that I tend to use is when you're actually going out to tender, actually ask for the program of works back in Gantt chart format. So then you can compare apples with apples between the two builders to go, well, why did one guy say he's going to take 4 weeks to do one stage and the other guy said he was going to do 8 weeks for the exact same stage? Clearly there's a conversation to be had between the two of them as to why there is a difference. Maybe one is really that efficient and that effective and the other guy isn't. Maybe he's just padding. Maybe one guy's overly ambitious and just because he's coming in fast doesn't necessarily he's coming in good. But what it does is it creates a conversation. And before you actually go to contract, you want to be giving that program of works, I guess, to someone like yourself to go, we want to make sure that this is actually included into the contract itself so that there's clear commitments by all parties as to what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of controlling that, how we manage the EOT or extension of time entitlement, it's always worthwhile having clarity around the critical path. I like to include provisions regarding updated programs coming with every monthly claim. Just keeps everyone on the same page as to where things are tracking. The other one with that is also including timeframes for notices around delays. I mean, a lot of the standard form contracts, they essentially approach it from the perspective that if a delay occurs, the builder will let you know once the delay is ceased. But if you're a savvy developer and you're involved in the project and you're looking at creative solutions, you'd want to know about delays right at the start so you can start working together to see how you can overcome them.
Absolutely. What about other bits of information about the project itself? So the builder, their builder's license, that sort of thing. How does that inform, I guess, the work that you put into the process?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if the developer's already gone out to tender and they have received prices back, the first thing I want is a copy of the builder's tender. That shows me how they are approaching the job from a commercial perspective, but also it tends to give a bit of an insight into their sophistication from a contractual and commercial perspective. Some builders have got 2-3 pages of terms and conditions on the back of their tenders. Some it's just it's really a bill of quantities, or it's a pure pricing tender. It doesn't note their assumptions and that kind of thing. Those tender assumptions, they're really important to have a think about them. I mean, a deal is, the transaction that you're making with the builder, the price is one thing, but how that price may change is as important in my view, because you'll be as you're working your way through the project, you'll be tracking all your margin and your costs and all that kind of thing. You don't want to be to seeing that margin slimming while you're also waiting for the keys to get into the new property and put that out to market.
Yeah. There's also, I guess, a number of things that are kind of hidden within that tender response, which is hiding in plain sight usually, and that's what the builder has actually called as out of scope. And quite often, we go straight to the back page and look at the bottom of the page and go, what's the price point? And we forget to actually look at, well, what is included and what's not included. And so from a scope of works perspective, if it's written into the scope of works, it's in. If it's written in the out, it is definitely out. If it is in neither, it's also out.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things that I always recommend is you've actually got to do a bit of a deep dive into the builder's tender, not just include. Builders will always want their tender referenced as a contract document in its full form. Now, as you were saying, to the extent there's inconsistencies between that and the scope of work, you don't want to be having that argument to start with. So I always like to do a bit of a cross-reference from the developer's point of view, their project requirements and their scoping documents, and then the builder's tender. Now, really, the only elements of the builder's tender that we should be including in the contract are those that we specifically agree with, and we're happy to approach the project on that from that angle. Yeah.
Yeah. So otherwise, it's we went out to tender, they responded to tender. Neither of those actually should be in the contract. What we should be doing is, I guess, Frankensteining that into the actual contract and then having the contract stand alone is, I think, what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah. The contract should capture everything. It shouldn't really be. It should capture the whole deal in its final form. With disputes around the formation of a contract and what we term battle of the forms, where there's arguments around, which document trumps which other one, that kind of thing, arguing about inconsistencies. Those arguments are very often expensive.
Yeah. Some of the things that I see from that project information side of things that are quite often severely lacking is, I guess, the specifications of, what's the tile, what's the color, what are the tap fittings, all the fixtures and fittings side of things. And often the builder will have a builder's range and go, well, you can choose anything, anything in that range because they're all at a single price point. But nobody's actually defined that at the start. Yeah.
And looking at the mechanism of, sometimes it is the case that you can't make those selections up front. I always recommend everything is fully scoped and to the extent that it can be is priced, at a fixed price, really. But that's not. I appreciate that's not always possible. You're still thinking through the product that you want to take to market, and doing your research as to what's hitting the mark for investors and purchasers. But the key thing to think about is if you are going to be making decisions around any part of the specification. So if we're talking any of the prime cost items or provisional sums, you want to be thinking about how your direction is. How you're going to make sure the builder sticks to it, but then also how you're going to control the costs around that.
Yeah.
Now, for the most part, standard form contracts approach it with a fairly general lens in terms of developer makes a selection, gives a direction, builder goes off, purchases the materials, or for provisional sums performs that particular activity or scope of work. And realistically, the way the contract actually approaches it is that whatever the cost is to the builder is now what you're on the hook for. Now, there's some creative ways to get more clarity around that. one of which being a clearer provisional sums and prime cost um, process, whereby you're giving an instruction to, say, seek a number of quotations to make sure you're getting market value, and then you're approving one or finding your own. And then once you've reached agreement on that, the scope and on the quote, you have a mechanism in the contract where that fixed amount is now part of the contract sum, and that is a ceiling for that scope. What we don't want is, you having the freedom to make selections midway through, but then that spiraling and being a massive blown out cost that you weren't expecting.
So you touched on two terms there, and you went through that really fast. So provisional sum and prime cost, and I think that's one that gets super confused in the community. What is the distinction between the two?
Yeah, okay. So I will say they are terms that don't carry with them a standard definition. They carry with them an industry perception as to what they mean. So, but it's really important to make sure that you actually know how those mechanisms are going to operate. In their most general sense, a provisional sum would be for a scope of work that either hasn't been completely scoped out yet, or you're just not sure whether you will want to go ahead with it. As in, it's an optional thing, but it may be a value add that you want to think about it once you see how the market's tracking. You might want to add some additional things into your project to make it more attractive to buyers. A prime cost item is typically a rate that has been allowed for particular materials, because the builder's not entirely sure, or the developer's not entirely sure of the extent of that scope, but they're going to have a rate that will apply to it. So they're the general approaches to them. In terms of how you manage that cost and how you get clarity around what you're going to be on the hook to pay, they're the things that you really want to be thinking through. And I mentioned just then, as far as some things that are kind of optional scopes, the way I like to approach those is as kind of a separate element of the contract, being pure options. And the way we work through those are, if it's genuinely just an option, but it is able to be priced at the start of the job, what I like to see is a price for that option that's locked in at the start. And then there would typically need to be a deadline by which the developer needs to tell the builder, we're going to go ahead with option A, to avoid delays and that kind of thing. And then once that direction is given, that fixed price that you noted in the contract right at the start, that's what applies. Everyone knows the rules, everyone knows what they're entitled to and what they're liable for.
Yeah. So I might just, on your definition, I might try to give a use case so people can actually apply the knowledge. So from a prime cost perspective, you said a rate allowed for materials. So an example might be, hey, I don't know what my tiles are at this point in time, but I know I'm going to be laying tiles. So I've allocated $25 a square meter for those tiles at this point in time, and I'll choose what that product is a little bit later on. But and we know how many square meters are needed. So we've got a price that's actually been allocated for that. If I then end up choosing a $30 a meter tile, then there's, I guess, a justification for the price difference, because $25 a square meter has been put in the budget.
Yep.
Is that a fair assessment of that?
Yeah.
Okay. And then provisional sums might be something along the lines of, well, I know I'm putting in a kitchen, but I don't know if it's going to be 3 drawers or 4 drawers, and I don't know if it's going to be soft close. I don't know if it's going to be a powder coated finish or whatever. So I've allocated, $15,000 for the kitchen arrangement, but that design element has not been done.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, in a general sense, provisional sums are estimates, and they're only as good as the information that they're based on. So if a builder's putting forward a tender with, a third of the job is all provisional sums, I'd be wanting to sit down and work through, well, okay, what kind of clarity can we get around this scope? Because I don't want that third of the project, 1.5 times or doubling. If I'm making selections that you haven't, the builder hasn't taken into account in making those allowances.
Yeah, and so I guess then the gotchas start to come in. I've got a fixed price contract with a bucket load of stuff put in for provisional sums, so it's not really a fixed price contract anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that element essentially, depending on the mechanism you've got in your contract, but for a lot of the standard forms, that portion of the work is effectively cost plus now.
Yeah, and so understanding, I guess, the real measures that actually go into that. So equally, I guess when we start to look at this, when there are builders range and we go out to tender, and one builder says, well, my gold package, and the next builder says his gold package, they might have the same name or very similar, I guess, hierarchy of level, but they're not necessarily the same product. And so being very clear on what your product's selection is before going out to tender will enable you to actually compare each builder on their merits, because they can be completely different. Gold in both could be a completely different product.
Definitely. And I mean, there are a lot of industry terms that are thrown around, which they have a historical definition that's been built up over decades of people using it. However, to the extent they're used, I always like to get to the bottom of what people mean when they use these industry terms and how they want that to really play out. I think is the key thing. Don't assume because two builders have used a similar wording for something that it actually means the same outcome is going to be the result.
Yeah. So in order to avoid a lot of that, where humanly possible, have your product selections before going out to tender. Put those product selections in the tender. Then everybody knows exactly what they're actually quoting against. They may want to provide an alternative, but that should be a variation rather than. So then you've got apples with apples comparison.
Definitely, and I mean that recommendation there sticks, or it applies regardless of your pricing model. I think too often I see cost plus contracts entered into where the parties have gone cost plus not because that is the most appropriate pricing model, but because the job hasn't been fully thought through yet, and more often than not they end in tears. So it's having those robust conversations at the start around what each party really wants to achieve.
Yeah, there's a couple of gotchas with cost plus in that there's no incentive for the builder to actually reduce the cost because he gets a margin on the cost. So the higher the cost, the better his margin. So it should be one that's entered into, I guess, sparingly.
Yeah, with some caution for sure, and I think that's where that guaranteed maximum price comes in as an attractive option. A bit of a you're not putting all of the pricing risk on the builder, but you do have some clarity as to where it could, worst case scenario, land.
Yeah. Site information is, I guess, the other thing that I would anticipate, I guess, you needing to know a lot about. So I guess understanding the geotechnical requirements, the slope, what our adjacent neighbours are having, what other things that you need to understand from a site perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, once you've got an idea of the project, that also informs what sort of site information is required to have a proper view of the project. So if we're talking basement car parks or we're talking major earthworks, that kind of thing, what I would hope to see is some fairly detailed geotechnical investigations. And why I want to see those included in the contract is because the builder's entitlement to additional money and time when they find something in the ground that, it could be that it's if it's a renovation, it could be in an existing dwelling or any existing structures. But the term latent condition is another one of those industry terms that everyone will have likely heard. Various sort of slight variations on that term. Again, the term latent condition only means what it's defined as in the contract. And the clearest way to define a latent condition is by reference to the information that's available to the builder at contract signing. So what are they required, or what are they warranting that they have taken into account in giving you their price? And to the extent that we don't have a very detailed, geotechnical and any sort of if it's a site that's undergone remediation, any of those sort of contamination reports, that kind of thing. If that exists, but it hasn't been provided to the builder, or it's not in the contract, we're looking at sort of spiraling towards arguments around what should have been expected.
Yeah.
So it's all around how we inform that approach to latent conditions, knowing as much as we can about the site, but then it also comes back to that actual risk assessment. So if we've got a really well detailed set of geotechnical investigations and they show nothing, nothing untoward, it's a very favourable site. In our negotiations, we might not be as concerned about those site risk elements of the contract, because it's unlikely that the builder is going to come across something that they then want to claim more money or time to deal with. Whereas if we've got a really difficult site with a lot of different conditions in it, we'd be looking to tighten up those provisions around latent conditions. Stepping away from what's actually in the ground or unexpected things, as you said, neighbours and access. If the builder's going to be controlling the site, realistically, it's going to be on them to a degree, how they manage. They're accessing the site, whether traffic control is necessary if you've got a tight street for access, and then also managing neighbours. No one loves living next door to a construction site, so that there is an element of how do we allocate that risk? What's the builder expected to do as far as causing as the least amount of headache for the surrounding neighbours and the street and that kind of thing, so that we're not. You're not in a situation where you're trying to focus on getting this project finished and getting it to market, but you've also receiving angry letters from your neighbour.
Yeah, and there are lots of instances where, if you're building to boundary, the builder may have a requirement to actually go inside the neighbour's property and that sort of thing. So good neighbour relationships is critical in all instances, but in particular in those instances. So, minimum standards of behaviour and things like that are, and how and where to raise issues and challenges where there is a conflict. So there's awareness by all parties, I would imagine, would be part of that process.
And those the smaller or the standard forms that are more appropriate for the smaller jobs, they, as I said, they approach it fairly generally. So, and from the perspective of protecting the builder from issues that generally are not within their control, but they're not always outside the control either. So most of those small contracts, they approach disputes with neighbours and latent conditions, access, all those things to do with the site and its surrounds. They approach it in a way where the builder actually has a much lower risk profile than, or rather a much shorter list of obligations than what typically plays out when you've got a good builder on deck. They will manage those things and they will investigate the site and that kind of thing. So, if that's how you're wanting it to play out in practice, right, you're relying on the builder's experience, their relationship management, their working with different stakeholders, that kind of thing. That's what you're hoping for them to manage. So it should be in the contract. How you're expecting it to unfold needs to be reflected in the contract, for sure.
Yeah. Then I guess moving on, commercial information. So I guess there's a number of elements here that I can think of just off the top of my head. So there's the financier's willingness to do drawdowns and what are their conditions to do the drawdowns. And then there's the builder's request for when they want drawdowns, and those two are very often in conflict with each other. How do we manage those processes?
Yeah, definitely. It's a big one. So if you're receiving a contract from a builder and it's a standard form contract, it's always worthwhile having those discussions with your financier, with your lenders. because you don't want to be stuck in the middle, carrying the empty bucket, and both parties or the builder's got their hand out for money, and the bank or the lender is saying, well, no, we haven't hit our mark yet. I think the biggest thing is understanding what the lender requires in order to release that money, because contractually and also under the various states' security of payment legislation. Now, you cannot contract out of that legislation. That legislation is designed to protect contractors' cash flow. What you do not want is a scenario where your lender has not assessed or is unable to pay out an amount which you are, under that legislation, obligated to pay. The other issue is as far as how we're containing that contract price. So we were talking about cost plus before. Financiers and lenders, they hate cost plus because it's, where's it going to land is pretty well unknown. The other issue that in terms of, if a heavy portion of the contract price is provisional sums, lenders are often going to be a little bit concerned about that. The other one is knowing whether your lender is going to require a tripartite deed, or sometimes called a side deed, which incorporates. It's designed to protect the lender's interest in the property in the event that they need to step in, or in the event that they need to. It sometimes extends to rights to replacing the builder or stepping into your shoes and taking over the project, that kind of thing. Making sure that document is going to align with the contract, and again, that the developer is not stuck in the middle with an angry lender and an angry builder.
Yeah, a lot of builders don't understand tripartite agreements, and I'm going to say a lot of developers don't really understand it either. What's the essence? What's the key takeaways that people need to know about a tripartite? And if your builder's creating pushback, how do we give them the right information so they actually understand why it's either in their interest or not in their interests?
Yeah, so the tripartite deeds, they most frequently come from the lenders, and the lender has given you a large chunk of money to get this project done, and they are their secured interest is in what you are working towards. They don't want to be giving you a bunch of money and either the builder is off in the wind, or the developer's having financial trouble. They are typically designed to protect the lender and to ensure that the processes around payment and that kind of thing align with your funding, like your loan facility, that kind of thing. In terms of how you get the builder across the line on those things, it's a little bit case by case, because builders have a varied list of issues with those contracts. But early conversations, working through any concerns they have in a practical and events based manner. So thinking, not just scary words on a page, because banks do have a lot of scary words that they feel need to be in all these documents. But it's what events are actually going to trigger these things. Having those practical conversations and turning what looks like just a scary document that's out there to sort of screw anyone over if they're not towing the line. You've got to approach it from the perspective that the job's not going to happen without the funding. So everyone needs to be on the same page as to what needs to occur for that money to flow from the bank to the developer to the builder.
Yeah, and for me personally, one of the things that I like to make sure goes into that is for any progress claim to come down, any sign-offs. So has the slab been poured correctly? Is the frame certified? Have we got our plumbing certificates? That ensures that the subbies underneath have actually been paid and that the work is actually to an appropriate standard. And if for some reason the builder does go under, it's much easier to hand that project over to someone else.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, those particularly, by reference to the stages, the smaller standard form contracts, they approach stage payments with the idea that everything's just going to keep rolling. Everything's going to be fine. They don't really allow for a process where if there is an issue around whether a stage has been reached and whether it's been, the work is quality. Now, I mention that because what that can lead to, if you're using a very standard form contract and then you have an agreement with your lender whereby they need to see certain things before they're willing to release the money, but if the builder isn't required to show those things under your building contract, you're going to be left in the middle.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking to avoid whenever we've got lenders in place, and that's always one of the questions is, and also including what's the balance? What's the balance between the developers' funds and then also the bank? How much are we relying on the bank, and how important is that relationship?
Yeah, there's also often the lender will actually have a mandate that they won't sign off until a QS goes out and confirms that the works have actually been completed. The challenge here starts to become multiple. One, the QS will say, well, I think there's 29% of the work done, and the builder will say, well, there's 30% of the work done. So there's a challenge there. Even if you get a sign off to say, yeah, the frames have gone up and they've been built to the Australian standard, that doesn't mean that the frame is actually going to create a straight wall. So there's a whole bunch of things that actually go into elements of this, and also, it may have been signed off, or it may be a work in progress. Either way, but you can see that there's a problem there. But the builder doesn't want to recognise the problem because in his work, it's a work in progress. It's not actually a defect until the project is complete. So a mechanism to go, well, I can see the problem. How do we actually give feedback on that?
Oh, definitely. And I mean, you don't want to be raising the bank's processes with the builder at that first stage payment after he's hit you with an invoice. That's not the time to be raising those procedures. It's right up front so that everyone knows what rules are we playing to.
Yeah, ideally, if you can, you want to be putting that into the tender document to go using this lender, and these are their requirements, so the builder actually knows what they're signing up for in the first place.
Definitely.
Yeah. What about documentation to put into the contract, mate? What are the things that you need from that perspective?
So the things that I want to see typically are and not necessarily to include it. So there's two lists. There's documents that you'd want to be giving to your lawyer, and then there's ones that you want to be including in the contract. Now, as far as ones that in my view, if a lawyer's not asking for these, it's probably a bit of a red flag. You're likely to get a fairly standard contract review, not a project-specific one. So they're things like the drawings and the specification, the builder's tender, that geotechnical information, and a bit of background as far as I think around commercial leverage and your bargaining power. That also really helps. If you've done your homework and you've gone out to tender and you've received 3 competitive prices, I'm not saying that's the norm, but in terms of getting a cost-effective outcome from a construction lawyer, a large part of it is how hard can we go on this contract? How much can we push back? There's no value in having a lawyer review a standard form contract, change every single clause, send it to a builder, and the builder walks off into the sunset. I want nothing to do with that. That looks like a nightmare. I'm not building it. Where there's no value there. So it's about identifying what are the key risks. We want to change the contract, make as few changes as possible to achieve those commercial outcomes. And it's really hard to do that without having all those documents.
Yeah. Very good, mate. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that I've missed that somebody should be talking to you about in that engagement?
Oh, mate, really, it's just all that information around the project. A good construction lawyer is a lot more interested in the project than you will think. So I guess the only thing I would say is don't be concerned if a construction lawyer is asking you a lot of questions about the job you're actually, or the project you're embarking on. I would be encouraged by that for sure.
Very good, mate. Okay. Any lucky last thoughts and comments, as tips and tricks for somebody to think about before engaging, I guess, a contract lawyer?
I would think about how it's really about that balance. So think of those three key objectives. Where are we wanting this to land on quality? Where are we wanting this to land on price? And where are we wanting this to land on program? And thinking about what that balance looks like for you and for your margins. I think that's kind of the key thing to be thinking about before engaging a lawyer.
Very good. Thank you, mate. Greatly informative, so appreciate that. And for everyone else, just a reminder that Pat did recently present at our recent Sydney event. We run these events all the way around the country: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide, both physical and live streamed. And what he presented in that event was all about the different clauses to be changed in a contract. What are some of the gotchas that are in those contracts? Remembering there's a lot of different kinds of contracts. It was a very comprehensive coverage, mate. So if anyone wants to see that one, become an annual member, have a look at the back catalogue of recordings, and otherwise come to one of our upcoming events. We're coming up to our Sydney process, mate. Chris Kringle, that's going to be fun. So, and we got a couple of sponsors that are throwing a few dollars over the bar as well. So that's always welcome, mate. Thank you very much for your time today and information. So, folks, I'm going to say bye for now. See you next time.
Thanks very much, Rob.
Okay, bye.